just it really turned me off with Marjorie Taylor Greene, seeing her go all in on that, because like, well, you've been very outspoken about Ukraine, but then you're going all in on the guy who has 2 Ukraine pins. Like,
Yeah.
come on, what are we doing?
He's got them on his shirt. God knows where else he has them, right? We don't want to know. Easy, Kevin. Don't show us. Don't show us your tattoos. Yeah, see, that's a question. We talked, Dr. Paul and I talked about it on the show, and we talked about it off the show. And, you know, I think you could make a good argument for her position. And that is that, you know, basically the Democrats don't do this. They don't shoot themselves in the feet. As soon as they get power, they rally behind Nancy Pelosi. And I'm sure a lot of them realize how brain dead she was and is. But they don't want to make a public show of hacking each other to death. So with that in mind, you know, Dr. Paul always voted, when it came to like formalities, he just always vote with the party, because it doesn't really change anything. It doesn't really change very much. And if there's not really, you know, the old chief of staff, Tom Lizardo, would always say to us, do you want to make a point or do you want to make a difference?
What is up, everybody? My name is Kyle Matovcik. I am the host of the In Liberty and Health podcast, where we talk all things liberty, health and wellness, and beyond. My hope is to encourage and spread the message of liberty and physical and mental well-being. I hope you enjoy all the topics we talk about with our guests. We're on all major streaming platforms, so please sit back, relax, and enjoy.
Man, I'm doing as good as anyone can do, getting buried by his 13-year-old son on leg day.
I'm not going to apologize for not being on this podcast because I got to go see Metallica. So if that's a problem, kiss my ass. Okay? All right.
Awesome. All right, everybody, this is In Liberty and Health, and today I've been really, really looking forward to this conversation. I have the great Daniel McAdams with me. Daniel, how are you doing today?
Kyle, thanks so much for having me on your program.
Of course. Well, as I said, I'm very, very excited to talk with you today. So I guess let's start with an introduction, then we can go on about guitars. So just in case nobody knows who you are, I'm sure they all do, but just in case, who are you and what do you do and what are you known for?
Well, I don't know if I'm known, but I'm Daniel McAdams. I'm the director of the Ron Paul Institute. My second job is I'm Dr. Paul's sidekick on the Ron Paul Liberty Report. I worked for him on Capitol Hill for 12 years. Until he retired. And then when he retired, we set up the Institute, and we primarily focus on foreign policy and civil liberties. But there's always some overlap. You know, we do talk about the Fed and banking, particularly as it's the Fed that really facilitates our disastrous interventionist foreign policy and disastrous interventionist domestic policy. So that's pretty much what we focus on. We're celebrating our 10th year this year at the Ron Paul Institute. We do the daily program. We do conferences pretty much around the country every year. So, you know, it's basically, you know, that remainder of the Ron Paul revolution.
Yeah, well, it seems like that's kind of spread out throughout the Republican and the Libertarian parties. I was pretty staunchly against the Republican Party prior to starting this podcast back in October of 2021. And I've had quite a great few guests on this program, and I actually interviewed the candidate for lieutenant governor here in Pennsylvania, Carrie Luz Del Rosso, yesterday. And I got to say, I'm taking a liking to them a little bit more, but I just wish they would shut up about China. That would be phenomenal if they could shut up about the China stuff and realize like this is an empire on the verge of collapse. We would be so much better off. And I think that a lot of libertarians would probably say like, okay, well, we can kind of move in the fold here.
Yeah, that China is a weird one, you know, because you'll have a lot of great Republicans who will say, not another dime to Ukraine. We got to focus on taking on China.
Yeah.
The Chi-Coms are coming, you know, and it's really, you know, I've said it before, the most irritating thing about people who are obsessed with China and the U.S. government's obsession with China, whether you're Trump or whether you're Biden, is that despite all the talk about how much they hate China because it's totalitarian, they always want to import the worst things about China, you know, the surveillance state, treating people like crap, which we did. I mean, we literally lock, stock, and barrel adopted China's policies on COVID, which are the most totalitarian, you know, for the last maybe 77 years kinds of policies. So all the terrible, crappy stuff about China, they love. and all the great stuff about China, and there's a lot of great stuff about China. That's what makes them pissed off. And that's I mean, I'm basically just 180 from all these people when it comes to China.
Yeah. So one of the moments that I had listened to you on the Ron Paul Liberty Report for a couple of years now, and one of the moments that I knew, like, oh my God, Daniel McAdams is like one of the greatest people on the face of the earth, is when shortly after you guys had Blake Masters on, the Ron Paul Institute, which may or may not be ran by you, I'm told, had quote tweeted Blake Masters, said, Blake, you're great, but you got to drop this neocon stuff about China. And that's really what held me back from giving a lot of support for him, because he at one point had literally said there's going to be Chinese on the shores of California. Like, come on, dude, you can't be a Ron Paul guy and believe this shit.
Yeah, that was maybe a little intemperate to do that, but I just wanted, I just had to be out there. I mean, because I mean, a Ron Paul endorsement should mean something, and obviously no one is perfect, but you know, I'd hate to have another Ted Cruz, you know, Ted got a Ron Paul endorsement, and he basically lied through his teeth the whole time. And so it should mean something. If it doesn't mean something, then, you know, it's just one of those things. So probably wasn't the smartest thing to do, but just the idea that China basically wants, I mean, if you think about it, I mean, stop for a second, that China wants to acquire American soil and territory and subjugate these white devils under their bootstraps. It's so preposterous. It's so beyond a Hollywood movie. That it's not even worth considering. Now, do Chinese feel competitive with us? Well, of course. It's a developing nation with like what 1.2 whatever billion people, and they're developing and they're competing for resources, and they're out competing us. They build things. We don't do anything but sit around eating donuts all day, right? And talking about what our pronouns are. The Chinese, my guess is, are not obsessed with their pronouns. They're obsessed with competing. They're obsessed with the geopolitical changes in the world, and we're under some very fundamental changes right now, changes we haven't seen, I think, since the end of World War I, where the entire order of the earth, the entire political order of the earth is absolutely shifting as we watch it. We're at a point in history, and China is, of course, very closely observing this because they're looking out for their people. The Chinese are better capitalists than we are in the US. It's a lot quicker to get a business license in China. And yeah, if you start bad mouthing the political leaders there, you're going to have problems. But guess what happens in the US when you do that, right?
You take it off Twitter and off YouTube.
Yeah, or you go to Dallas, you know, in November of '63 and get your head blown off, right? So
yeah, you take a convertible car right down through Dallas.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's, you know, it's the whole, you know, log in your own eye, splinter in someone else's eye, I think.
Yeah, the one thing that had really kind of opened my eyes to this, and it sounds so counterintuitive, but Peter Schiff, who's my absolute favorite economist, I remember, I want to say 2019, I started listening to him, or maybe even 2018. And he was mentioning the trade deficits that we have with China. And then all the Republicans just want to stick it in China's eye, saying that, you know, that they're ripping us off. And then he would mention these trade deficits. And I started looking into this stuff. I'm like, we're like benefiting from this because we send them debt. They send us goods. Yeah. And I also heard the saying once that we go to different countries with bombs and they go to different countries with a suitcase. Yep. So now both are very unsustainable, but, you know, which one collapses first? In my estimation, it kind of looks like China, because now even there was an article, I don't know if you're familiar with Joe Solis-Mullen. He's a writer for the Mises Institute and for the Libertarian Institute from time to time. He shared an article this morning saying that for the first time in a couple decades, I think they said, China's population is actually in decline.
Yeah. That is a serious issue that they have to deal with, you know, among other issues. And, you know, they do deal with things in a top-down manner. That it's an authoritarian government, and that's not a pejorative term. It's just a descriptive term. Russia is an authoritarian government. It's, again, just a descriptive term. You know, one of the problems we have, and this is, you know, the shifting political tectonics in the world now, are what I think is becoming more and more evidence is what people like, someone that's really influenced me a lot lately is Professor Ryszard Leguto. He's a Polish professor, and he wrote a great book called The Demon in Democracy. And essentially, you know, the thumbnail sketch of the book is that essentially liberal democracies in the post-Cold War era behave very much like the totalitarian dictatorships of the Cold War era, which is that there is one ideology that's allowed, only one ideology. It is the end of history. Anything else that's a competitor has to be crushed. There's a little bit of this in the Wolfowitz Doctrine, but the Wolfowitz Doctrine essentially is about the use of force. It's force. This is more a philosophical perspective that leaders in the West, leaders in the so-called liberal democracies, believe that any competing ideology is just by definition the enemy. So you can't have an Iran that's a theocracy that probably neither of us would necessarily want to live in, particularly as I don't mind to have a glass of whiskey here and there now and again. And they're probably not, I shouldn't even say, they're probably not as hardcore as the Saudis are on that sort of thing. But nevertheless, not necessarily, I'm not a Shia Muslim, so I probably wouldn't be super happy there, although I probably would eat myself to death. But nevertheless, there are countries that are following a more authoritarian route in economics and politics as well. And Russia is certainly one of those. They have a centrally driven, not centrally planned, but centrally driven economy where the government takes a much higher role in industry. And as Miesians, that seems anathema to us. But the non-interventionist impulse has to kick in and say, well, that may be true. It may not be the best thing for the U.S., but they shouldn't be undermined and overthrown because they've chosen a different path. And that's the real problem. And this is the problem we're facing in the world today. And that's why we are in World War III. There's no question about it. We are at war with Russia and China and maybe India over this. Every day we get sucked deeper into this war. When it finally becomes apparent to everyone that the war was launched almost a year ago, of course, it'll be hopefully not too late to back out. Hopefully people will start to pay attention, but we have to be honest about the state of the world right now.
Yeah. And it is grim to consider, but like you said, we do have to, live with the reality of that. Have you watched Jack Ryan at all? It's a show on Amazon.
I haven't watched the show. I did watch a couple of those movies. I like the one where the bad guys come into his house. What was that movie? The film with Harrison Ford. But no, I haven't watched this. I haven't watched the series.
Okay. My wife and I are watching it. And I remember hearing Robbie Martin from Media Roots Radio doing an episode on it and saying how the second season was basically just like straight up deep state propaganda. And I watched it a while ago before I was informed on foreign policy as much as I am now. And I'm like, holy shit. So the second season was all about basically how corrupt Venezuela was. And I think it aired in 2018 or 19. And so you kind of piece together from there. And then season 3 just came out, and my wife and I hadn't gotten to watching it yet, but I told her right as soon as we finished watching season 2 the other night, I'm like, all right, I guarantee you season 3 is going to be all about Russia or China. And then we start flipping it on, and what happens? It's all about Russia.
You've got more patience than I do. But the CIA is embedded in these production companies. It's been well known for decades. I think there's a great book, and I have it here on my shelf somewhere, The Mighty Wurlitzer, and it talks about how the CIA's historic control of the entertainment industry. So there's no doubt there's some advisors in there helping them with the plot lines.
I think I heard that you can't have access to a lot of like the military equipment if you don't kind of toe the military line in some of your films. And I have to imagine that's probably just copious amounts of money to rent that kind of stuff out.
Oh yeah. I know you want to be a player. You want to be a team player when it comes to these guys.
So I noticed, you had mentioned the guitar collection. So I guess let's talk about that then, because I didn't even know you played guitar at all, but this will definitely be a interesting conversation. So I don't want to sound rude, but how old are you?
Oh, I'm about 123. I am a child of the 80s. Let's put it that way.
Okay, so who's your favorite? Let's go for top 3 from the 80s for you.
I mean, of all time. I mean, a couple of caveats here. A, I'm old. B, I don't listen to music very much anymore. I made the mistake of, my son is now at college, but when he was at home, I exposed him to classical music very early. And so he can't stand pop music. And so we had more of that in the house. And so for me, it's like, I've become my dad. You know, when I was a kid, my dad was playing 50s records, and it just drove me through the roof.
Yeah.
You know, I forget what they call it, but he was always playing these 50s records. Like, oh my God, Dad, this is awful. How did you listen to this crap? So I'm that guy now, you know. But I mean, I grew up a massive fan of Pete Townsend and the Who. You know, I just liked everything about them. I loved his guitar style, which wasn't, you know, like a classic. I mean, obviously it started a classic blues style. You know, all the, you know, the British invasion were influenced by blues. You know, absolutely, they've sort of stole it from blacks in America. Basically, the Stones were the worst of anyone, I think. But I think he progressed to be such an interesting guitar player and such an unusual guitar player. He's always kind of been my favorite, I guess, in terms of that. But there's so many great guitar players. In fact, it's, you know, the great Jeff Beck, who just passed away, was shocking. He was, I mean, here I'm a kid of 12 years old. It's like, I mean, I'm giving it away. It's like 1977. I'm a kid of 12 years old. I'm living in Altaloma, California. I go to the public library, get a couple books, you know, this and that, and I pick up Jeff Beck's great album with Freeway Jam on it, you know, and it's just, wow, you know, this is incredible, you know. And I think that's the kind of thing that probably inspired me to start trying to play guitar. And of course, I'd never mastered it. I never even became close to mastering, but that sure turned me on. The local, you know, the local community libraries.
I am stoked to tell you guys about the show's new sponsor. I am now working with MTS Nutrition, which is a brand that I've believed in for a very long time, and they run awesome cells and they have awesome products. So I want to tell you about their amazing protein powder, which you're going to ask me how many pounds I have of the protein powder, and the answer is all of them. So here I got red velvet cake, 25 grams of protein, and they have the amino acids and everything on there, 59 servings. Peanut butter fluff, fluffernutter, 26 grams of protein, and then also the chocolate chip cookie, which literally has real pieces of chocolate chip cookie in there. So 27 grams of protein, 180 calories. As I've talked about on the show, getting your protein in is very, very important, so make sure you hit that link below and purchase your protein powder through MTS Nutrition. Boom!
Okay, wow. Yeah, that's really interesting. I remember all my friends would always play guitar here, and it seems like I was the only one that really kind of stuck through with it, which that wasn't like the main inspiration, but I remember my dad listened to like Motley Crue and Metallica and stuff like that, you know, because I was born in 94.
Generation.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, my dad was born in 69, so he's 53 now, but yeah, he used to listen to all sorts of metal stuff. And I remember he got me like some early 2000s kind of rock, and I was just like Incubus and some more, a little bit more mainstream stuff. And then like I discovered Slipknot, and then started listening to the whole discography of Metallica, all of Pantera, and still to this day, I don't think there will ever be a guitarist that like wows me like Dimebag Darrell from Pantera did, because just watching like the Pantera home videos where they're setting up these giant paper mache pot leaves in front of hotels and blowing them up just was like the coolest thing in the world to like 15-year-old me. And, you know, of course, me and all my buddies would go down to the basement and start firing off fireworks at each other and stuff, and, you know, turn the amp up to 11 and just cranking it. So, yeah, that was really, really big for me. So were you into like any heavier stuff, or is it just mostly like kind of rock and blues for you?
Well, you know, what happened with me in my generation, which is obviously a few before yours, but, you know, they're the excesses of the 60s, you know, had a real impression on music at the time, the Woodstock era, and, you know, this whole sort of thing, this whole sort of, you know, just pop. And then you had the garishness of the early 70s with the big shoes and the, you know, Elton John look and this and that. And, you know, the real reaction to that came in the mid to late 70s, you know, with the arrival of the Sex Pistols on the scene and the Ramones on the scene. So the punk rock revolution was really, you know, it was really a cultural fundamental revolution in music that just like ripped everything to the core. And it was basically the DIY feature of punk rock that was so appealing. It's like, hey, you know, just like nowadays it's, hey, you get a podcast. Back then it was, hey, you get a band. You know, it's like, oh wait, hold on, I don't know how to play. It doesn't matter, man. It's just, you know, this is punk rock, you know. So that's what it was all about. And, you know, when I was in high school, they had every so often there would be a lunch, one of the bands for the kids in school would play during lunch.
Oh,
and inevitably it would be, you know, like the same Led Zeppelin songs, you know, that they could barely get through. And it was that kind of hard rock. And we finally got the okay for our band to play. And this was, you know, this was the the early 80s in California, Southern California,
Mhm.
and punk was not accepted where we grew up. And we just like started, we went into like Social Distortion, the Sex Pistols, and by the time we played 3 or 4 songs, the whole high school, the whole quad area was in a massive riot. it was like all hell broke loose because all the metalheads couldn't believe the crap they were hearing, and they just started throwing things and throwing punches. And it's kind of sad, but after that, they said, we'll never have a band on campus again.
I mean, at least you guys got to go out with a bang, right?
We went out with a big bang. So it was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And
sorry.
I know, I was just going to say, and I guess it kind of faded out as I got to college. I was in with, a band with a couple of guys in college, but it never really went anywhere. And it just kind of faded away after that. And I really got into, like in the early 2000s, when all of a sudden, all you needed, like with us as kids, it was, a cassette recorder and 2 cassette recorders. You could have 2 tracks, and then they had the 4-track cassettes. Wow, that was awesome. And then all of a sudden in the early 2000s, if you had, a Mac with GarageBand, you basically had a recording studio on your computer. So that got me jazzed about doing stuff again. And I spent a few years just like fooling around with that. But, time gets away from you as you get old. And so unfortunately, I don't do much anymore. But I will say I noticed your guitars in the background, and my 14-year-old daughter was begging for an electric guitar for Christmas.
Okay.
And it's like, oh my God. I mean, it's like typical parent. I don't want you to do what I did, right? I don't want you to get into rock music. I spent thousands of dollars for the kids having piano lessons and learning to play classical piano and learning music theory. The last thing I want you to do is waste it on an electric guitar. But of course I relented, and so it's just out of reach here, but I got a really cute little Squier Starcaster. It's a semi-acoustic. It's black. And it's like, I'm feeling very excited about guitar again, because even though it's just a Squier, it plays phenomenally well.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
It plays really well. And I have a Telecaster that I rarely touch. Right. But playing this and the sound, the action, the humbucky pickups, you get a really full sound. I mean, for the price, it is a nice instrument.
Yeah. So real quick side note, I guess, relevant story. I bought my wife a guitar because she kept saying that she wanted to learn how to play. And there's this website called Tom and Music. And they have a brand of guitars called Harley Benton's, and they're actually like really nice, affordable guitars. So I bought her one of those, and then it was like this red one with gold. I don't know, it's that one right there. But so like the tuners are gold, and the body of it's red, and the bridge is gold. And I bought it for her forever ago. She doesn't play it. And she had told me, well, I was going to get you this guitar for Christmas, but unfortunately they were out of stock of it, so I couldn't get it for you. So like, whatever, I forget about it. She got me like this little whiskey glass with a pick in it, and got me a strap with sharks on it, because if you can't tell, I absolutely love sharks.
That's cool.
I'm sitting down here the one day editing some podcasts, and I look over to my left where that guitar was sitting, and then all of a sudden I look and I see this here, and it looks awfully similar to that one. So this is another one of those Harley Benton's. And
wow.
This was only like $200, and this guitar sounds, plays, looks absolutely phenomenal.
Wow, that's a great deal.
Yeah, so they do have to ship out of Germany, but they do ship pretty quick. But yeah, I'm sitting here just editing stuff, and I look over, I'm like, and so I walked downstairs, and I'm like, was this fucking thing in here for weeks or something? Like, I had no idea it was here. But
what a gal.
yeah, she is a keeper. But
that's awesome.
Yeah, so I've just found that guitar for me has just been kind of like the number one thing for me. And I feel bad because like on Twitter and everywhere else, I don't promote my personal band as much as I should. We got to open for Lita Ford once, and we're opening for her again in May.
That's
and
cool.
I can't freaking wait. And then this might serve as a good pivot too. In 2020, June of 2020, I don't know if you know who Steel Panther is.
I'm afraid I don't.
Okay, they're like a goofy kind of metal band where they write, I don't want to say like spoof songs, but they write some like songs that are just funny. Like they have a song about Tiger Woods and mention how he went around, fertilizing the ladies in the neighborhood. So in June or July of 2020, we opened for them, and it was a sold out show in Butler. And I want to say it was like a week or two before the giant Trump rally up here, where 50,000 people showed up. So, I mean, this is the middle of bumfuck nowhere. And there's like, I want to say a couple hundred vehicles lined out in front of us. You're allowed to not wear your mask in front of your vehicle, but if you went beside it or walked away from your vehicle, you had to put on a mask. And in between each song, people would be hitting their horns and stuff. It was it's a really, really cool experience.
Oh, that's awesome.
So but you just couldn't beat going to a live concert. And I'm afraid I've just been so bad with it. Just that feeling of the music in your chest, the snare drum, every single kick, on and off stage is just absolutely amazing. So,
have you guys gone into recording studio or?
Yeah, we have one EP out now with 4 songs, and then we have a couple like singles out. We did Message in a Bottle by the Police, and cool. I think my singer just knocked it out of the park. I'll have to send some of the stuff over.
Oh, I'd love to hear it. That's
awesome.
Neat. That's great.
Yeah. So what were some of the more memorable concerts that you had got to go to when you were younger? Because I feel like back in the 70s and 80s and even in the 90s, there were just so many cool tours, and now it's just like not the same anymore.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was a lot of the punk gigs from the 80s. You know, it was in we actually played at the Cafe de Grand, which is in Southern California. That was like a really top place. Of course, we were like 7 bands for $1 a night, right? So I mean, I can't take any credit for that, but a lot of those great shows, like in Riverside, a lot of skate punks, Social Distortion, the Vandals, Circle Jerks, all of these guys, we saw them live, and it was a lot of fun. But in terms of like a big concert, I think I saw the Who in 1983, and that was really something. And the Clash opened for them, so I thought, this is great, like 2 in 1, because I've always been a massive fan of the Clash. But the Clash really sucked live, and they sucked live then. And it just wasn't a good show at all. So, and it's now been so many years since I've gone to a major show. I also like, different kinds of alternative music. There's a great band from Lithuania called Laibach, and I like them a lot. They're great. There's a lot of social commentary. They're basically anti-fascist, anti-authoritarian, but fascinating. So I went to see them in Budapest. I lived in Budapest in the 90s. We went to see them. My wife and I went to see them in Budapest, and we were both working for the local newspaper in Budapest at the time. So it was pretty cool because she was able to get us tickets to go to the show, Comp, and I was able, as a writer, to do an interview with him. So that was pretty cool to do that.
Oh, yeah. That's all really cool stuff. It seems like music today, like there isn't a significant counterculture, and I know this is almost cliche, but the rage for the machine at this point, it's very, very upsetting. And I'm kind of lucky that, like, in small town Pennsylvania, most of the bands that we play with, most of these are people that are playing these bands are like working class people. I mean, they got calluses on their hand, dirt shoved up their nails, much like I do. And we all talk about our work week, and a lot of the guys that, I mean, fuck, even my bass player in my band owns an automotive shop, owns a bar, and sells dogs. So
that's awesome. Good people.
Right, absolutely. You want to kind of see this resurgence of like a counterculture. So like you hear people say all the time, like, just shut up and play music. But like, I'm kind of the opposite approach. Like, some of these people should speak up, because there are a lot of people out there who feel just completely enraged about what happened to them over 2020, because bands didn't really get to tour, and that's how they make a lot of their money, is off of touring and selling merch. So I want these people speaking up about the injustice that was done to them,
because they'll do it again if they can, and without hesitation. I mean, I won't name the name, but it's a friend of mine I came to know as a friend, who plays in a very well-known band, and he's an absolutely brilliant guitar player. I mean, phenomenal guitar player. And this is a very well-known band. And like for 2 years they couldn't tour. And if you're in a band, that's your bread and butter.
Absolutely.
And the poor guy, I mean, this guy's a world-class musician, and he's trying to, offer guitar lessons online, to people. And it was just tragic to see. And I mean, I know that he's pissed off. I hope he stays pissed off, and I hope everyone stays pissed off at these people. They can't get away with what they did. They just can't.
Yeah, it was really tragic for us too, because I remember we had our CD release show in, I want to say like late January or early February of 2020. And like we had all these big festival shows, and I'm like, man, we're going to be going all over this side of the country, and then dropped. So it was a huge bummer. So I don't know, when I see people criticizing musicians for speaking up, like I don't agree with Ted Nugent on everything, but the dude's not dumb. He's talented as the day is freaking long, but when he's right, he's right. And I don't know if you know who Havoc is, but their guitar player and singer, he's a very outspoken guy as well. So I don't know. I'm all about those guys. The same with Phil Labonte from All That Remains. He's got a decent following on Twitter, and he's very much so a libertarian. So like I said, I just encourage these people to speak out, because they're part of the culture, which is something that I think you would probably agree, a lot of libertarians are kind of lacking a presence there. So the more people we have kind of pushing the message that we want to see out there, definitely the better.
Yeah, because the only people who do are not ashamed to grab the microphone are all the woke tards, preaching all this BS. And I think push back a little bit is great. And there have been a lot of libertarian, like overtly libertarian musicians who they incorporate that into their lyrics and what have you, and I think it's great. And if you got the microphone, you should use it. You don't want to overdo it and start lecturing people like the other side does, but absolutely, I think it's a great thing to do. And you talk about a counterculture, like what better counter friggin' culture is to own a car repair shop, sell dogs, and what was the other thing, and own a bar. I mean, that is punk rock. That is totally punk rock. My newish friend Reed Coverdale, and I think we both know Reed.
Reed actually stayed at my house. He was sitting right next to me at one point. When he's moving back to New Hampshire, so I'm sorry, but
counterculture is getting one of those big ass trucks and driving it. That's this, right? Isn't it? That's that. I mean, anyone can have a podcast and yap away for 3 or 4 hours. All it takes is a couple of cups of coffee or some whiskey or whatever, but getting one of those monsters, that's counterculture, and that's why I just dig it so much. I grew up blue collar. In fact, my mother's from Pennsylvania, but I grew up in a blue collar working class family, and that's those kinds of people have been crapped on, and they're looked down on, and that's why Trump won, because he didn't treat them like crap. He actually treated them pretty well, and
Yeah, so my dad shared something today. I want to read this to you because I think you'll probably resonate with this. Okay, so yesterday a client stopped by to say goodbye. I remember putting gas in his vehicle when I was preteen, so probably 12 years old. Great guy. His wife passed away in the 90s of cancer. He stayed here and raised his kids and got them through college. Now he's living with a great woman on the coast of Florida. I'll be sad not to see him anymore. He actually shook my hand and said thank you for several decades of phenomenal service. Kind of brought a tear to my eye, but in a way I'm kind of jealous, and God bless him. But to that point, I mean, when I worked for my dad at his small repair shop, I remember seeing people come in and shake my hand and say, look, I knew there had to be another. I watched your grandfather, your dad, and now you all grew up. And like, you just don't see that kind of stuff anymore.
That's awesome. It's awesome. Mm-hmm. It's awesome. Do things, people that can do things, I was really thrilled. My son has just started grad school now. Mm-hmm. But he was just home over the Christmas holidays, and he did waste a little time sitting around, I'll have to admit it. But he went out to the side yard and built a forge and started forging a sword. I mean, he's out there all day. He rigged up the thing, and he's got a fire going, and he's got a sword in there, and he's pounding it on an anvil. It's like, okay, do stuff, make stuff. That's the counterculture.
Okay, so what was your youth like? Because you mentioned a kind of blue collar upbringing, and I've seen you say something over to Reed about this once. So I'm kind of curious about your experience, kind of growing up around a similar culture that I did.
Yeah, well, I grew up in Southern California. My dad was a truck driver, so in those days it was different though, because when you were a truck driver, especially if my dad was a Teamster, but if you were in a union, you had a good job. You had like 4 weeks of vacation a year. You weren't rich, but you could afford a house. And my mom stayed home. And as we got into high school, she would get some jobs to get some extra money. But essentially, you could live on one salary. You could live pretty well. You could have a nice vacation. Nothing fancy. We had a travel trailer. We went up to the redwoods every year and had a couple of weeks just like hanging out in nature, which is the greatest thing in the world. Yeah. So those kinds of things are basically gone. I mean,
Yeah.
I can't imagine that, a single person with a job like that. It's just tough. And there are a lot of bad things about unions, absolutely.
Mhm.
Nowadays, a lot of corruption, but they served a great purpose in the day, that's for sure.
Yeah, so my stepdad's an electrician and he's been a union electrician for like the last 30 years. And then, as I kind of laid out earlier, my father's side of the family, I mean, they've been automotive business owners for years and years and years. And then I've worked in the automotive business for about a decade too. And the one thing that I kind of talk to people about a lot, I kind of wish they had the same experience I did with my first job in the automotive field, where I was making minimum wage, changing oil on cars and rotating 80-pound truck tires,
Oh
and
man.
them telling me every single day, "You're not paid to think, you're just paid to do. You do what I tell you." And man, I got my teeth kicked in day in and day out, and I hated every second of it for the 16 months that I was there. But then, like, kind of looking back at it now, I'm like, I'm kind of thankful for that experience. And I think a lot of our culture today could use that same experience of kind of getting treated like shit for a little bit, so that
Yeah.
way it builds you into a more robust individual as you go on.
Were you in high school when you had that job, or was it
Yeah.
after?
Mhm.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I had the same thing. My guess is the kids nowadays don't have jobs in high school. But when I was in high school, I was a cook in an Italian restaurant, and it
Mhm.
was just normal. I probably worked 30 hours a week in a restaurant,
Yeah.
in the evenings, and I went to school during the day, of course. And yeah, you're treated like crap.
Mhm.
There's no question about it. I worked my way up from being a dishwasher to being a cook, and talk about, it's probably not as literally dirty as working with cars, but man, you finish a shift cooking all the evening, you got food caked over you.
Mhm.
I can only imagine it's pretty embarrassing, but like you go out with a gal afterward, and I'm sure I must have smelled like a fishmonger or something. No wonder I didn't have a ton of dates, I guess. But
Mhm.
I mean, again, like you say, I wouldn't trade it. I wouldn't trade it at all. I love that hard work. It really it does build a lot of character.
Mhm. Yeah, and like, I really feel that's missing with a lot of the younger generation. I hate to sound like a boomer, old man shakes fist at sky, but it is kind of well needed. And I kind of understand where people are outraged because they can't get a job that really pays their bills sufficiently. But on the opposite end of that, a lot of people aren't willing to ask what additional responsibilities they can take on that would justify paying them more.
Yeah. A good friend of mine from church, his son, I think, is around 20, and didn't want to go to college. That's fine. It's not for
Mhm.
everyone, that's for
Yeah.
sure. So instead of sitting around whining or getting some crappy job, he learned to weld, and now
Mhm.
he's a welder. He's got like 2 out of the 3 certificates that you need, and like, hey, that's a pretty good job. That's a pretty good career. You can go anywhere you want to go. You can put a rig on the back of your truck and be mobile if you want. Um, and I was telling him after church on Sunday, I said, the great thing about that kind of thing is, when his shift is over, he goes home, maybe he cracks a beer,
Mhm.
and it's all over. I mean, that's your time now. You don't have to deal with that. And, so yeah, it's exactly, what are you willing to do? You can have a decent life
Mhm.
in that way, but you got to make some sacrifices. You got to learn this trade. You got to learn a skill. You got to learn how to make something or do something or fix something. But if you can, and you're not lazy, there's still a lot of opportunity out there.
Absolutely. It is very meritocratic in that regard. So, are you kind of hopeful that people will kind of stop going to college? I know, like, with this whole student forgiveness thing, student loan forgiveness, um, it seems like that may incentivize some people to go to college. But I think some people are starting to look at it and realizing, like, this isn't worth it. And the trade schools are pretty expensive too, but there's more honest work and I think more honest pay there and more reliable pay.
Yeah.
What do you think about college versus like trade schools now?
I think if you want to go the route of liberal arts, I have a degree in English from UC Berkeley, so I have one foot in that world. But if this is a different world than it was. I graduated in 1988. Feels like 1888, but no, 1988. And it was bad. There was a lot of wokeness there on campus at Berkeley, obviously, but nothing like today. Nothing like today. So the idea of going $100,000 in debt, to having some harridans screaming at you about your pronouns for 4 years,
Mhm.
and if you dare happen to be the slightest bit conservative or libertarian, then you're worse than Hitler. I mean, I would say it's definitely not. But everyone is different. You know, my son is an aerospace engineer now, and there's just no way that he could have gone to where he's going and wants to be without a college degree, because that stuff is super, super technical, and you have to study it. But definitely, if you're interested in poetry and writing and drama, which is what I was interested in, um, you you can learn that later, right? You can learn that later, you know. But I would say generally now it's a positive thing that people are realizing that college is not all it's cracked up to be. And I think we're going to see a backlash. I was just looking at an article recently about the it was a ranking. It was that, I forget what it's called, Fire, and I don't know if they're right wing. I don't know what they are, but they're free speech on campus, I think. And they had a ranking of the most pro free speech campuses in the country, and that's a good trend, you know. So if you're starting to see a rebound from this wokeist crap, and you're gonna celebrate free speech on campus, then that's a good swing of the pendulum, I think.
Yeah, no, I definitely would agree. I went to a Votech college, and I don't think people understand how complex some of these trades are getting. I mean, I could just speak for the automotive field. I did 3 days of hybrids courses, and I mean, that's just kind of like scratching the surfaces. So I mean, like when it comes to General Motors, I am fully certified in hybrid technologies, but like, man, this stuff isn't getting any easier. And you know, the dealership labor rates. I mean, I'm in Greensburg, Pennsylvania, which is like, you know, there's like farms all around here, and then you have like this big strip of all sorts of stuff, and we're charging $200 an hour.
Wow.
And now that doesn't go.
That's like lawyer fees.
Yeah, but it doesn't go into my pocket. I make not even a quarter of that. But you know, like, how are you supposed to afford to fix a freaking car anymore? And then we also did a PDI, which is just a pre-delivery inspection on a new Cadillac Escalade V. $150,000 for a Cadillac now. Like,
jeez, does it have like an espresso machine in it or something, or a bar, or does it come with the, you know, a driver? That's insane. Wow.
Yeah, I think they have like cup coolers. So I mean, you know, at least, you know, your cold brew from Starbucks would be cold, right? Something like that.
Exactly. That's wild. That's wild.
So what was your experience like in other countries? Because you lived in a couple different places, right? You lived over in Ukraine at one point as
no,
well.
I lived in Hungary through the 1990s. We moved out just after Clinton was elected. And we moved back to the U.S. just as he was leaving office. So I like to joke that we were in exile during the Clinton years. But yeah, but while I was there, I traveled a lot through the region because I was working with the human rights group out of Oxford University. And so we did a lot of traveling. We did a lot of war reporting in the Balkans, because that was the time when Yugoslavia was breaking up. It was a time that the big thing that I did was there was basically a U.S.-backed coup in Albania in 1996, and so I spent a lot of time over there during that coup. It's pretty nasty business, and you know, it's a small country, and I think something like 1,500 people were killed in it. But it's a small country, so you know that you got to comparison-wise, it was pretty bad. But I've traveled throughout the region. I've never been to Ukraine. I've been to Belarus. Never been to Russia. I've been to Armenia and Georgia. So a few of the former Soviet republics, but not the biggies, I guess.
Okay, so I guess kind of pivoting from there, what are your thoughts on Trump and DeSantis 2024? Like, it's probably a tired line from libertarians, but I do think DeSantis is poised to be the guy, and I feel like this is going to be a straight walk back to the George Bush era. And people say, oh, he voted against regime change in Syria in 2013. But you listen to this dude talk about Iran, and even like when he talks about Russia, he's not good. And obviously he's a Republican of the 2020s, so he's bad on China. So I'm curious about your thoughts there.
All right, guys. I'm absolutely thrilled with the show's new sponsor. I am now sponsored and have an affiliate through LMNT electrolytes. I have used these electrolytes for years. Back when I used to do a lot of fasting, in fact, I used to drink, sometimes I want to say up to 7 a day, 7 little packets. So the packets are full of all the electrolytes that you need to perform and hydrate yourself properly. You need sodium for pretty much every single function in your body, despite what a lot of people may tell you. sodium doesn't actually cause a lot of the issues that people kind of would have you believe. So just real quick to give you a little bit of facts, you don't need sugar to hydrate. Electrolytes in water don't require glucose to pass through the gut. The average American consumes over 60 pounds of sugar a year. And when it comes to athletic performance, you can actually lose up to 7 grams per day in hot climate. So make sure you click on the affiliate link below to get all your hydration needs. And like I said, I'm super stoked to have these guys teamed up with the podcast, and just make sure you get your electrolytes through LMNT. All right, guys, thanks.
It's a shame. I mean, it's kind of how I feel about Trump. I wish Trump was different. I mean, there's so much I like about him. I love how he just blew apart the whole PC. He blew apart all of these sacred shibboleths. He just he just laughed at him, so he was so great. But when it came down to the nasty business of fixing that car, right? He could joke with you, but when it came to turning those screws and fixing the car, then he screwed the whole thing up. Yeah. And that's the real sad part about Trump. I mean, he hired John Bolton, he hired Nikki Haley, he hired all these ridiculously horrible people who spent the entire time working for him, stabbing him in the back. And it's shocking. So Trump was a huge disappointment. The only good thing he did is when he hired my friend Doug McGregor, like with 2 days left of his presidency. Doug, I need you to get us out of Syria. I need you to get us out of Afghanistan. You got 48 hours. This tape will self-destruct in 5 seconds. I mean, come on, man. But DeSantis, DeSantis was very brave. I mean, he started out really bad during COVID. And then he just woke up and said, this is BS, and changed the whole thing. And you can imagine the pressure on him, the slings and arrows he withstood, Death Santis, they called him, but on foreign policy, which is an area where the president really has very, very broad, legitimate constitutional authority, he's extremely bad. He's a neocon. And that's just all there is to it. And he bows down to all the things you bow down to. I think when he took over as governor of Florida, they held their first legislative session in Tel Aviv, which is a foreign country. They don't vote for you. So he definitely has very strong neocon tendencies. So for me, especially as a foreign policy person, that makes it somewhat less attractive to me. I don't know that he's paid enough of his dues yet. I don't know that has the depth that he needs to have. But he's young, he's good looking, he's got a good looking family. He's energetic. Florida's a great success. Everyone wants to move. There's like Texas. Everyone wants to move to Texas, Florida. So he's got that going for him. And I don't know how you need to call some kind of an exorcist, right, to exorcise that neoconism. And this is a real disease among Republicans because, especially as you very well pointed out, a Bush era Republican, because there's this idea if you're not tough, then you're just a liberal wimp, and I would have thought that would have run its course by now, but it hasn't. There's still that mentality. Got to get tough with these Chi-Coms. To what end? To what end? What do you want to achieve? So it's there's nothing to get excited about in either. I don't think that Trump will change his spots. I think he lacks curiosity. He lacks intellectual curiosity. He lacks the dedication to seeing a job through to the end, which is ironic because he's a very successful businessman. Usually people that are like that, who hire crappy managers, who don't really care if the work gets done right or not, who don't really care if they listen to you or not. Usually those guys lose businesses, but he's apparently been successful. So I don't know what's going on with that.
Yeah, and I think the pretext is laid out for kind of an escalation with China. And the one thing that Republicans have to stop with is this, you got to look tough, because what do they always say about Biden? Oh, we look so weak. We look so weak. And, we got to stick it to China. He's got to look tough for China. He's got to look tough on Russia. And this is usually where Republicans attack him from. A lot of them, they're good on Ukraine, but they're not good necessarily for the right reasons. Like, oh, well, we're not looking tough enough. That's what they're saying most of the time. which is just ridiculous. But yeah, the whole Uyghur genocide stuff. I had somebody tell me once, oh, well, when are mainstream people going to talk about this? I'm like, the president of the fucking United States has said they're committing genocide. Like, how much more mainstream does it get from there? And then literally, if you just type in Adrian Zed's retraction, you're going to find all these papers that say exactly, what he did was complete total debauchery.
Yeah. But most of the Uyghur stuff is total CIA psyop stuff.
Right.
I mean, it's just a fact. The Dalai Lama has been in the CIA pay for decades, right? It's classic CIA stuff. You try to peel away. They did it with the Soviet Union. They did it with Russia as well. You try to peel away. I mean, the communists were great at this. That's why we have a lot of the problems we have today is nationalities policies in the Soviet Union and in Yugoslavia as well. They sent a lot of Russians to Latvia because they wanted to be able to tamp down Latvian nationalism. And that's true throughout the region. And now when the whole thing is over, well, you got problems because you got a lot of Russians there, lived there for generations, and the Latvians hate their guts and they won't give them citizenship. They treat them like crap all the time. So we basically emulate a lot of what the Soviet Union did to try to break up countries we don't like. And so the Uyghur stuff, I've never bought it. I think it's a bunch of crap. I think the Dalai Lama stuff, obviously the guy's in the pay. So the fact is that all of these tough guy Americans who think we're going to take on the Chi-Coms don't understand is that if China invades Taiwan, they will win, they will take Taiwan, and we will friggin' lose. We were in Afghanistan for 20 years fighting a bunch of people with no shoes on their feet, and we lost, and we're going to take out the Chi-Coms. Give me a break. This is ridiculous. We don't even have any weapons left. We gave them all to that clown cocaine addict Zelensky. We literally don't have any weapons left. And the weapons that we have left suck. I'm sure you saw that video of that F-35. It landed, did a nosedive. It's a joke. It's a joke. But it's manufactured in all 50 states and in 5 foreign countries. So that's what it's all about. It's about corruption. It's about the military-industrial complex. It's not about defending this country, that's for sure. And if it came down to it, if a war breaks out in Europe, NATO will lose. Doug McGregor has been there. He's done that. He knows all about it. He said it from the beginning. The U.S. and NATO will lose. And that's going to be a real wake-up call, I think, for people. But if nothing changes in the near future, that will happen.
Yeah. So I was kind of the mind that I didn't think there was going to be significant differences between Biden and Trump until this whole deal where they brought Zelensky in and we're hanging the flag in there. I'm like, all right, well, I do think that this still would have happened under Trump, but like the Zelensky and them hanging the flag in there, I can't say that I believe Trump would have put up with that because at least he in that regard kind of had like this nationalistic pride. And I don't say that as a pejorative, but he loved his country and he's not going to let these fucking clowns put up a flag of another country up behind him. So it was so ridiculous. But one thing that was kind of eye-opening for me was seeing Marjorie Taylor Greene go all in on Kevin McCarthy because she's been really good on the Russia-Ukraine stuff. But like Matt Gaetz is amongst these Republicans who's kind of retarded on China, but like he's been really good on Ukraine and most of the other stuff as well. I really admire the way that he stood up with the other 20, whoever they were. I know Lauren Boebert and Thomas Massey was kind of in that group, although Thomas kind of changed his mind once he got good concessions. It really turned me off with Marjorie Taylor Greene, seeing her go all in on that. Cause like, well, you've been very outspoken about Ukraine, but then you're going all in on the guy who has 2 Ukraine pins. Like, come on, what are we doing?
He's got him on his shirt. God knows where else he has him, right? We don't want to know. Easy, Kevin. Don't show us. Don't show us your tattoos. See, that's a question. We talked, Dr. Paul and I talked about it on the show. We talked about it off the show. And, I think you could make a good argument for her position. And that is that, basically the Democrats don't do this. They don't shoot themselves in the feet. As soon as they get power, they rally behind Nancy Pelosi. And I'm sure a lot of them realize how brain dead she was and is. But they don't want to make a public show of hacking each other to death. So with that in mind, Dr. Paul always voted when it came to like formalities, he just always vote with the party because it doesn't really change anything. It doesn't really change very much. And if there's not really, the old chief of staff, Tom Lizardo would always say to us, do you want to make a point or do you want to make a difference? And that was his mantra. And so I can see her position. I think it hurt her brand to do that, to be all in with Kevin. It hurt her brand because she really is a very outspoken. She's a rabble rouser. It did hurt her, I think. Massey played it very smart. He
Yes.
And we talked about it at the time. And Massey's on the board of our institute, and I think Massey is he's definitely the second Ron Paul in Congress right now. At the time, we were curious. We weren't critical, but we were curious because he wasn't tweeting. He's tweeting all the time. He wasn't tweeting. He wasn't saying anything, but he was voting for McCarthy. And so Dr. Paul and I assumed that basically his view would be a view that Dr. Paul would agree with. This is not the hill to die on. There was no one really better in the running. The other people they were trying to get didn't really want the job. So you can go either way. However, even some progressives after this said, you know what? That's democracy in action. That's not a travesty. That's this group of 20 saying, you know what? We're not going to just roll over, for Kevin, it's my turn, McCarthy. We want something out of this. Now, the question of whether they'll actually get it or not is one thing, but the benefit of having such a tight margin is that we basically have a de facto third party, and that's one of the few good things about a multi-party democracy like you see in Europe is you have coalitions where minor parties sometimes can take on huge importance and huge power, and that can be a very good thing. So if they can retain their cohesiveness, and I would suggest that they do that. I don't know if it's a Freedom Caucus or whatever it needs to be. At the time Dr. Paul was in, we had the Liberty Caucus where we would have regular Thursday Liberty lunches in Dr. Paul's office. He would order up a bunch of shrimp, and I would find a speaker, and we would have, we had prominent people. That's how I got to know people like Doug McGregor and Phil Giraldi, and all these great speakers that we had, Jonathan Turley. That's how you keep these groups together. And I hope that they do something like this because that's only 20 people, but they've got a ton of power.
Right.
So in conclusion, I mean, I probably spoke too much about it. In conclusion, you can make an argument either way, but I would say to use a cliche, all is well that ends well.
Yeah. So like I admire her independent streak amongst her peers. I think that was a bad hill to go all in on. And Thomas Massey, I think, kind of like you were alluding to, was playing it strategically and didn't want to go on without a plan. So the plan was, hey, we get concessions and then I'm going to vote for him. And it seems like that's kind of the way it played out. So I really don't have a problem with that, but kind of just going all in after you've been the best person on Ukraine. You said, it hurts her brand, but there are kind of takeaways all around there that were interesting. But hopefully the Republicans kind of stick to it. And then even like you said, some progressives were kind of siding with them about some different stuff like military stuff. So I hope that stuff comes to fruition. We'll just kind of have to see because I know sometimes it's a little bit of a hot potato.
Yeah, well, if Massey, having a prominent position on this committee. That's going to look into the FBI's involvement in domestic political affairs. Having him with the ability to subpoena, having him on that committee prominently, I would say that's definitely worth the trade-off. If that's exactly, we don't know what was in his mind, but if that's what they were talking about all the time, hey, just take it, lay low for a while and you'll get this, then I think that's a hell of a deal because he is so smart. He is so principled. And, the great thing about Thomas Massey is unlike most of those bozos, he doesn't need the job. He doesn't need it. He was already an enormously successful businessman. He built a beautiful house in Kentucky. I'm sure you guys you've seen that wonderful 20-minute film about Massey building his house. He doesn't need it. He's there because he's a true patriot and he wants to make the country better. So having him there to look into this stuff, it's like one of the very few bright spots right now.
Yeah, I completely agree. What is your go-to whiskey?
Oh, that's a good question. Now, I don't drink a lot of spirits, but I do have to say that there's a Texas company. It's up near Fort Worth, I think, or Waco. It's called Balcones. I'm not sure even if I'm pronouncing it that well. But they have like a wide range of whiskeys. But they have this one. It's a pot still corn whiskey, a corn bourbon, and it is it's hey, I'm a cheap guy. I'm not a rich guy, so it's at the low end of their price points, to use a cliche. I get it for like $27 a bottle, which is cheap for good whiskey. But I'm telling you, it is really, really good. The only danger is that it's so tasty, you're tempted to pour a second or third. You got to be careful because it's not one of those 80 proof whiskeys. It's like in the upper 90s or 100 proof.
Oh,
whiskey, so.
Geez.
But it's got a it's almost like batter. It's just got that real mouthfeel. It's a great. I think for the price. I mean, I think it's one of the best that I've had for that price level.
Okay, I'm kind of lame. I guess my go-to is normally Crown just because everywhere has it. And that was kind of like Dimebag Darrell's drink of choice. And I just
you want to be cool like him. Yeah.
And there's also a company here in Pittsburgh called Wiggle Whiskey, and their stuff's really, really good as well. And my dad gave me a bottle. I think it's Proper 12. It looks like Jameson, but my dad said, "Oh, I don't like this stuff." So I tried. I'm like, "Holy shit, this stuff is pretty freaking smooth."
Yeah.
So, those are some that come to mind. I also do like Jameson. Jameson's pretty good too, but it does have a little bit of a kick.
The George Dickel, I think it's the 12 or whatever the highest one of theirs. I think they're doing premium ones now, but that was also a pretty good one for the price. It's a 12, I think is what it's called. But anyway, as I say, I'm not an expert. I'm like the furthest from an expert in it, and it's probably the best because it's not a habit you want to pick up too strongly. I generally like to have a glass of wine or something, but yeah, that Balcones, it's a pot still bourbon, $27 a bottle. You can't beat it, in my opinion.
Oh yeah, no, that all sounds pretty good. My problem is that when my band plays, especially when we do these outdoor festival shows where it's like, bring your own alcohol, I tend to be the guy running around pouring everybody a shot, and then I have some bad stories from nights like those, but that's okay.
I was gonna say your playing unfortunately doesn't improve. I mean, to a level it does. Your inhibitions are lower, but then at some point, there's diminishing returns.
You kind of have like this happy medium where you got to balance it just right. And I've gone way beyond, and I've gotten right to the point plenty of times, but you just got to kind of work it. So
give me the microphone. I want to talk to you people. I love you.
Yeah, they had to cut me off once, and it was like my drummer messaged me, and he knew that I knew that he knew I knew better, and he just laid into me. And like, if he would have said like, "Dude, you can't ever do that again," and like, "We're throwing you out of the band," I would have been like, I deserve it. So I know you had a little bit of a time limit, and I want to be respectful of your time. So I got two more questions for you if you got a second.
Okay, sure.
Sure. What does liberty look like to you?
Oh, it looks like being left alone. I one of the things that I've done several times is I'm a religious person, and I'm a traditional Catholic, and I've spoken at several traditional Catholic conferences, and not to give you the long story, but basically people who are tradition minded, not just in religion, but in architecture or other things, the state is your enemy. And so one of the things that I tried to do, my last speech was called Evil Empire, Why American Catholics Must Divorce the State, or something like that. And I tried to convince them, you can't have the kind of world you want, with God at the center, with the church at the center, if you still worship government. You have to hate government. So even if you think, oh, libertarians, you're these godless scumbags who want to open the borders and, want to have sex and drugs on every corner, that's their misperception. And I'm coming to them saying, oh, you want to build like a sustainable community that's centered around faith and prayer and farming and, whatever. Guess what? The state's going to be there in 3 seconds to kick your ass. So what you have to first do is get rid of the state, and then you can do what you want. And if you're in Oregon and you want to have a commune and smoke pot all day, hey, that's fine. But you got to get the state off your back. So liberty looks like the ability to do whatever the hell you want, as Dr. Paul would say, as long as you're not hurting anyone else or stealing their stuff,
Nice. Yeah. I can hear it in your voice. Dan, this has been an awesome conversation. Where can everybody find you?
At ronpaulinstitute.org. We didn't talk about it, but I was just reinstated to Twitter after a 3.5-year ban for saying something mean about Sean Hannity. Believe it or not.
It's not mean if it's true.
It's true. Yeah, that's right. It is true. But I'm at Daniel L. McAdams on Twitter. Ron Paul Liberty Report every weekday at noon Eastern time live. We're live on Rumble every weekday at noon Eastern time. And we do generally about 3 conferences a year. We do one kind of in your neck of the woods, I guess, in DC, usually every year. That's where we really get together and have a great time. We have hundreds of people there and just have a terrific, terrific time. It's so important. That's what they try to do with COVID, is to keep us apart, right? Keep us apart, keep people apart. Our conferences bring people together of all backgrounds. The Ron Paul Institute is not a libertarian organization. It's a fusion organization of all different ideologies and backgrounds, so that are interested in peace. So come to a conference, watch the show, check out our website. We put up new articles every day. It just give you like, here's your quick read of the day. Here's something to think about for the day. So, and get in touch with us. You know, it's the Ron Paul movement is definitely still alive. Of course, it changes as it ages, as the movement ages, as the young people are now older and have families, and the next generation is coming. But it's still alive, and it's still there, and it's still growing. So I think everyone should take heart in that.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. So, Dan, if you don't got anything else, we'll close her out, and we'll say our goodbyes on the other side.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dan.